My name is Michelle White, and I'm located in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm going to be your room host today, so I'll be monitoring the chat. If you guys need anything, I am going to go ahead and at some point put my cell phone number in the chat. If you guys need anything, just feel free to shoot me a text. And I've been with the Excel Center since 2010. I started out as a life coach and was a life coach for about a year, and then I became a project manager as we began opening new schools. So I was a project manager here in Indianapolis until we had 9 schools. And then I transitioned into my current role where I run a couple grants. I oversee a grant serving 16 to 24-year-olds. And then I also oversee the Generation Work grant through the Annie Casey Foundation. And that it really has led us here in Central and Southern Indiana to focus heavily on diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial equity. And so I've been championing that work as well. But you guys didn't come to talk about me. So let's go ahead and turn it over to Lisa and Christy, and they are going to have an awesome presentation for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. Welcome to the Using Proven Health Literacy Practices in Your Classroom session. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to share these tips with you today. So we'll just introduce ourselves. I'm Lisa Carey. I'm the Senior Health Literacy Writer and Editor here at Health Literacy Media, or HLM for short. We are located in St. Louis, Missouri, and we're excited to share with you today. Christy, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself too?
Sure. My name is Christiana Reedy. I work as a health literacy and science writer here at HLM.
All right. So to keep background noise low, we are going to ask you to just mute your audio for most of the webinar, although it is interactive. So at certain points, we'll ask you to share answers with us, and you can either just type in the chat box or just speak up. And then in the next few days, early next week, you'll get an email with a summary of the main points of this training and a list of resources that you can use to learn more about health literacy. So let's get started. A little bit about HLM. We're just kind of a small but mighty health communications nonprofit based in St. Louis. We were founded in 2009, and we've built a small staff with a wide array of sort of talents, but we're all passionate about health literacy. And we train health organizations to use health literacy materials. So here's our agenda for today. First, we'll look at health literacy and how it applies to the classroom. Then we'll look at concrete practices for choosing or creating materials that make lessons and assessment easy to read and understand. And finally, at the end, we'll just show you a few health literacy resources. But like I said, with those, we'll send those to you. So first, what is health literacy? It's largely the communication between healthcare professionals, patients, and healthcare systems, such as hospitals and insurance companies. To be successful, health communication has got to be clear between those 3 things, the healthcare professionals, patients, and the healthcare systems, so that they all work together. And so health literacy is a group of communication factors that affect people's health. Clear communication does not depend solely on the patient or the person who's receiving the communication. And their level of knowledge or the literacy level that they have. It's really more up to the systems and healthcare professionals to communicate clearly in a way that patients can understand. And so in that same way, teachers, students, and the school system each have a responsibility to listen to each other and communicate, share information, and create informed decisions. But it's ultimately, the responsibility really lies with you as the professional and the school systems. So your role as an educator, we're going to be talking about ways to make health curriculum and instruction clearer. But even if you don't directly teach health classes, the strategies that we talk about today are just as relevant to organizational or internal communication. You will find yourself applying these skills to instructional strategies, student communication, reports, emails you send to your colleagues. It really applies to any written or verbal communication. So let's, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. These are the concrete practices or strategies that you can use for choosing or creating materials that will make lessons and assessment easy to read and understand. So, okay, there's health literacy, and then there's plain language. And sometimes it's hard to know the difference. But plain language is a tool that's just one part of the health literacy puzzle. It's communication that your audience can understand the first time they read or hear it. So by that we mean the purpose of a material should be, clear at first glance. So plain language is just one tool that's part of health literacy. So let's look at some plain language strategies that you can start using today. So plain language isn't just about words. It also includes design, such as white space, color choice, visuals that reflect your intended audience. So here on the left, we're showing draft language that we received from a university about Alzheimer's disease. And this is what we did with it. So this is the finished brochure cover that we created from that draft language. So you can kind of see here, this is just an example of how plain language it's a set of principles that are based on evidence. These all have studies to back them up. And when you apply them together, they can make a huge difference in creating communication materials and media that your audience can understand and act on to make more informed decisions. And so these principles are what we're going to be talking about today. And I will say here, you can just look at these and see the one on the right is more appealing. And, as we all know, that's kind of half the battle. Sometimes it's just to get students to want to look at something. So let's talk about these. So there are 5 main categories of plain language, sort of best practices or strategies for written materials. And that is to use or create materials that clearly show the purpose and audience at first glance, like who are you trying to reach and why? Second, we make sure that the content is easy to understand by defining or replacing complex terms. Next, we highlight the actions that you want students to take. Describe the behaviors in a specific, concrete way. And then next, use or create materials that are appealing and easy to read. And finally, use clear numbers, if numbers or calculations are included in your material. So, and as we said, these practices aren't just for written materials. We also use them for verbal communication, with the exception of making materials appealing. Okay. So here is our first of those 5 strategies. It's to use materials that clearly show the purpose or topic and is tailored to your intended audience. Here's another example. Whether it's online or in print, health information should show 2 things at first glance. What the purpose or topic is, in other words, what the readers will learn from reading it. And then secondly, who the information is intended for. Okay, so here's your first chance to use the chat. Tell us, where can you find the purpose of this material? Go ahead and type in the chat. What do you think the purpose is? Don't be shy. Clean water. The title, clean water, yes. Good. Yeah, normally, like for instance, on a written material like this, you find the purpose in the title. And if it's, let's say it's a website, you would find it in the main title on the homepage. So this holds true for pretty much all written materials. You want to show the purpose sort of in the main title. Sometimes it's also in the intro paragraph or something. So this material is about how to keep drinking water clean. And next, who do you think the intended audience is for this material, and what makes you think that? Who is this material intended for? Families, everyone, because of the families in the community, homeowners or residents. Yeah, families with children. Yeah. So the clue is in the photo, right? A lot of times it's really, adding a visual is one of the best ways that you can show who your intended audience is, because they can look at a material and see a photo right away. That's what catches their eye right away. And they say, oh, okay, this is something either about families or for families. This one actually happens to be for like elementary, middle school grade kids. So it's got the little, sort of cartoony garbage trucks going across. And then the photo of those are kids. I know it's hard to tell on this small screen, but okay, great. So there's the purpose. And there's some of the things that appeal to kids. Okay, so thinking again about the members of your audience, the Excel Center students that you teach, are there barriers or issues that they face that you're mindful of as a teacher? Use the chat to name some of the challenges that are faced by some of your students that, maybe aren't by some of the other by an average high school student. Jobs, food and shelter stability, time out of school. Yes, yeah. Taking care of children, jobs, family, transportation. Yeah. Okay, good. Lack of basic study and literacy skills, taking care of parents. Yeah, there are all kinds of challenges that they have. Some of the ones that we listed here, maybe like you mentioned, low literacy, learning disabilities, chronic illness, the responsibilities of being a head of household. So knowing this, how would health classes designed for your students maybe differ from a health class designed for, someone else, like a typical high school student? Can you think of some ways that maybe these health classes might be different or reach them differently? Okay, info about accessing healthcare. Yeah, very important. Yeah, what else do they want to know as head of household or adult learners? Okay. Yeah, we were thinking about things like, okay, resources. Yeah, being able to understand the language. Yeah, so highlighting things like, cancer screenings, adult choices like grocery shopping lists, nutrition labels, health insurance, chronic illnesses, prenatal health. Those are all things that are going to be probably more important to your students than maybe the average student. So let's keep going and talk about sort of that low literacy aspect. To find out why plain language can make such a big difference in materials, let's look at how people read. So I don't know if you've heard of eye tracking measures, but they can actually have these special cameras so they can see when somebody is looking at a web page or a print document, they can see where their eye moves to and where it rests. So it measures where the eye is focused and the motion of the eye. This data shows what areas of a web page are grabbing a user's attention and which areas the user is ignoring. It can help us understand both how users read and search for information online. So this eye tracking pattern that we're looking at now is from a reader with high literacy. You can see the way information is sort of being scanned for content. They don't read everything, but they sort of scan down the page in an orderly fashion, kind of look over to the left a little bit and down at the picture. Okay, so now here's a pattern of someone with low literacy. And, you can see that this person is going back over again. They're reading, their eye is scanning across, they're going back and forth, rereading. It's a much different pattern. So that's the type of thing that I know you all are sort of aware of and dealing with as teachers. Here's our next activity. So this is a handout. Let's go ahead and assess it for purpose and audience. Take a minute to just sort of scan the title and the headings of this material. Okay, so what do you think is the purpose of this material? And how can you tell? Nutrition, teens health development, health and wellness, choose activities, educating on good nutrition, food choices. Yeah. So does the title of this match what the purpose is that you all have? No. Yeah. No. Right. This is what, so all kinds of companies and organizations send us materials, and we always ask them, what is the purpose and who is the intended audience for this material you're sending to us? And every once in a while, we find this where the purpose of the material is actually does not match up with the heading, the main title that they've used. So in that case, we changed the title. And who is the intended audience for this? We can kind of tell it's for teens, right? Yeah. Yeah, again, it's hard to tell. This is a little bit fuzzy, but yeah, it's meant for teenagers. So, okay, great. Now I'm going to turn it over to Christy.
Great. So our second strategy is to make sure that the content, meaning the words and visual elements, is easy to understand. This is the principle that most people think of when they hear the term literacy. So, the first principle of making content easy to understand is to use materials that get right to the point. Think of a document as a journey the reader is taking. On this journey, the most important information should appear first. That's the need to know information. The background, which is the least important information, should be the last. Let's look at an example of plain language in action. What does this mean to you? Now, I think it would probably take too long for us to all enter in the chat, so let's just move on and see what the plain language version of this would be. It's people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. How many got that content? Another example would be this. Again, I'm not going to read these out loud to you, but let's go ahead and move on to the next plain language. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Now, this next one you might be able to figure out from the technical explanation. Can you guess? It is, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. These are just examples to demonstrate the importance of using common words in simple language. Plain language means that you write the way you talk in a conversational way. This probably goes against everything your high school teacher or college English teacher taught you, but they're not in the room right now, probably. So go ahead and use simple words wherever you can, contractions such as doesn't rather than does not, and you'll rather than you will, a friendly tone, and try to get rid of extra words. We also encourage you to watch out for jargon or complex words that require special knowledge to be understood. Basically, if you're wondering whether a word is too complex for your students, it probably is, or at least it could be problematic. Here are some complex words from educational materials we found. So what to do with complex words? Here's a two-pronged strategy. The first is to replace a complex word if there's a simple, more familiar replacement word for it. Think of the everyday way we talk to our family and friends. And the second is to define complex words your reader may need to know. For example, if they'll be encountering it in the future. Let's take a look at some examples using these two strategies. First, if you can, replace the complex word with a more simple or common word. For example, you could replace the word menstruation with the word period. Now, maybe you can put in the chat box what word we might use instead of alternative. Other options? Yes, we would suggest using the word other. Second, define the complex words your students will probably need to know, such as obstetrician. For this, you could define it as a doctor who takes care of pregnant women and delivers babies. How would you suggest describing ACT or SAT tests? You can put it in the chat. College tests. Yes, we would suggest defining it as a test that many high schoolers take if they want to apply to certain colleges. Awesome. So for this activity, why don't you indicate whether you would replace these terms or choose to define them? So let's start with the word fatigue. Would you replace it or define it?
Yeah, think about, this can be kind of tricky, but yeah, think about kind of, is it a word that they need to know? Yeah, look at you guys. You would
Absolutely.
replace it. Nice.
What about the term preventative care? Define? Yeah, absolutely. We would
Whoops.
agree.
Uh-oh. Mhm.
We would define preventative care as healthcare you get before you have a problem, such as a checkup. And for net income? Define? Yep. Yeah, we would suggest defining it as take-home pay after taxes. What about the term collaborate? Replace? Yes, we would suggest replacing the term collaborate with work together or something similar. It can be hard to decide what to replace and what to define. It all depends on if you think your students will need to know the term outside the classroom. Here's an example of how writing how you speak can make materials easier to read and understand. On the left here is text from a report about the benefits of exercise. It uses a lot of complex terms that people don't use in everyday life, like perhaps demonstrate and acute. The example on the right uses words that most people are familiar with and puts the information in a bulleted list for easy reading. It gives the same information using fewer words. Here's another example of how writing the way you speak can make materials easier to read and understand. On the left is text from assessment questions. They use a lot of complex words that people don't use in everyday life. The example on the right uses words that most people are familiar with. It gives the same information using fewer words. So for this last activity, here's material about heart disease. Why don't you all skim through this and see if you can find complex words that some of your students might have trouble understanding. Type a few of them into your chat box.
Uh-oh. I don't know how that happened.
Sorry.
Good old Zoom. Right.
Risk factors. LDL and HDL. Yes, absolutely. Those were some of the terms that we also identified as complex terms that might need to be defined or replaced.
Okay, should we go ahead and?
Yes, yeah. So yes, risk factor, heart disease, the blood pressure readings, HDL, LDL, obesity, physical inactivity, all of these were words that might cause problems.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Christy. Let's go ahead and move on. So this is our third strategy. It's to highlight actions that you want students to take. You know, usually when you're writing information, a lot of times it's to tell your students that they need to take action. So how do we do that in a way that they will actually, you know, be successful at taking the action? First, give them the knowledge. Tell them exactly what they need to do. Next, give them the skills. Tell them exactly how they should do it. And then third, this is the one that sometimes gets forgotten in materials, is motivation. Tell them why they should do it, what the benefit is to them to take the action. So health literate communication gives readers a very clear sense of what they need to do. So to make content action-oriented, we would describe the action, giving simple, concrete action steps, maybe step by step if you can, and then focusing more on what people should do and not what they shouldn't do. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but here's just an example. Your project idea sounds good. By Monday, please, write an outline for your paper, email it to me, and plan to write a first draft within 1 week after you hear back from me. So one thing that you'll notice here on this example is that it is numbered instead of bulleted. We love using bullets because it makes things easier to read. And when you have a list like this, where someone is, the action or what it's describing is in order, in sequence, then that's when you use numbers instead of bullets. So, as we know, the more specific and clear you can make instructions, the better. And these are some hand washing instructions created by one of our graphic designers here at HLM. And you can notice that she numbered each step and made the illustrations very clear and simple. And so, for a topic like hand washing, it's also good to find a demonstration video. Videos help people who prefer a more visual way to get information, and it can be a really good way to supplement written information. I'm sure you're all aware of that. On to the fourth strategy. This is to use materials that are appealing and easy to read. You don't have to be a graphic designer to recognize good design. So here's another material that one of our graphic designers helped develop. This material is about how to use a face mask, and it shows many of the ingredients of health literate design, such as color, visuals, the clear typeface that it uses, plenty of white space, headings, side boxes. All of those things are kind of like a recipe that comes together and makes an appealing and easy to read, well-designed material. So content has kind of a hierarchy. When you build levels, you show how information fits together. So in this example, a main title, headings, and subheadings help show the topics for each of the different sections. These headings and subheadings allow readers to scan and find the information they're looking for. So the two things to watch for here are, first, use consistent formatting of the heading styles. So like in this example, the headings are always in this white type in brown boxes, and then the subheadings are always in the blue text. Second, make sure that the headings and the subheadings really stand out from the body text. They need to be larger, bolder, or in color so that readers can really see them. Okay, this is a before example. It's how to read a nutrition label, but it has this just long flat list of bulleted items. It's not really clear sort of how these bulleted items relate to each other. You have to spend a few minutes sort of looking at it and trying, it takes a few minutes where you're spending brain power just trying to figure out what it's trying to tell you. So instead, this is the after. You can see it now has a heading that says, check these key parts of the label. And then it has the different kind of things that you're looking at, serving size, etc. It's got these subheadings, that are numbered, and the bullets sort of are organized. So you can kind of see how all the information fits together and relates to each other. Another key principle of clear design is putting related information together into chunks or groups. by grouping information and dividing it into sections or chunks with headings and white space in between, you both show the reader how the information is organized, and you kind of provide a more logical path of information. So this example is a self-care guide, and it's got some great ideas, but it's just in a very long list. So instead, doing something like this, where the related ideas are sort of grouped together in these circles, and then each circle has a heading, that really, again, it's sort of in the reader's journey through the material, the headings serve as the road signs. White space is really important to help visually separate the chunks of information and help readers scan and absorb information. It really gives their eye a place to rest also. So it keeps headings with the text they belong to so that they're chunked visually. And you can see there's too much space in that top paragraph. The headings should be sitting right on top of the body text, so it forms a chunk. And here, it needs more space in between chunks so that visually you would have two chunks, each with a heading and body text. Bullets are a great way to further subdivide content and add white space. This is a before and after of some information about SNAP, also known as food stamp benefits. So once again, you can either confront people with kind of a big, thick paragraph, or you can break it out into bullets, and it's just so much easier to read. So just a little list of good practices for easy to read fonts to use. Use sentence case where only the first word is capitalized. Avoid using all capital letters, and what we call title case, where every single word in a heading is capitalized. Capital letters make it just a little bit harder to read because low literate readers recognize text by their more familiar lowercase shapes. Secondly, you want to align the headings and the body text along the left margin. So there's that consistent place to go to track between lines when they're reading. Align the headings. Oh, I just said that. Use at least a 12-point size for body text. That's what most people are comfortable with. And then using a clear sans serif font such as Open Sans or Calibri. Let's talk about that on the next slide. Okay, so there are two main types of fonts. There's serif and sans serif. Serif fonts have the little feet, and sans serif do not have the little feet along the bottom. It's funny how much it's changed. Serif fonts, like Times New Roman, that's what older people like me are, used to, because that's what is used in newspapers and books and things like that. It kind of, when there's a lot of text like that, the little feet help your line. It creates an illusionary line that guides your eye across. We generally now recommend sans serif, like the one on the right, because they're just cleaner. They show the clear shape of the letter without the little feet. And this is what's being used now for digital, all the kinds of online social media, websites. So this is what younger people are used to now. Next is to use meaningful visuals, using visual cues to highlight important information, such as you can see icons, examples, bolded, colored, or different fonts, boxes or sidebars. So yeah, just key points that are related to the purpose and any actions that you want your students to follow. Okay, just one last thing about this, thinking about accessibility. For example, for persons who have color blindness, don't use color alone to convey meaning. Here's a very simple table that has one row in red to show that this is an optional session. However, for people who have red-green color blindness, the red really isn't perceptible. So this version uses color, but color isn't the only visual element to help the middle row stand out. This one adds bold and the asterisk so people can tell, even if they're colorblind. Okay, our final practice is to use clear numbers.
Yes. So, numeracy is the ability to understand and use numbers in daily life. To take care of their health, people may need numeracy skills to
Oops.
understand health-related data, such as blood sugar readings, estimate out-of-pocket health insurance costs, and also to use correct doses of medicine. First, you only need to use numbers that are necessary, such as numbers that will help readers make a decision or help them to take an action. Don't ignore numbers. Instead, consider your purpose and audience to decide which numbers will be helpful to them. Let's take a look at some examples where numbers may or may not be necessary. So on the left here is a Medicaid letter about choosing a primary care doctor. And it tells how many American adults have had contact with their doctor or other healthcare professional. This number circled in blue is not necessary. It doesn't help the recipients of the letter to make a decision or motivate them to take an action. This on the right is CDC material about social distancing. These numbers are very important for keeping people safe. The next strategy is to use comparisons to give numbers meaning. A number by itself does not help a reader understand its value or meaning. For example, if your doctor told you that your blood pressure was 140/90, would you know whether to be worried about that or not? To help you know if your blood pressure is okay or not, your doctor could show you a chart like this one that shows the range of blood pressures and numbers. These help give context by giving you a reference point. It also helps if you assign value labels such as low or normal, as this chart does. It also uses color to heighten the sense of urgency for people who are in the lower, the orange to red zones. Very large numbers can seem abstract. We suggest using social math to make large numbers more concrete. For example, according to the World Health Organization, in 2019, an estimated 10 million people fell ill with tuberculosis worldwide. That's 5.6 million men, 3.2 million women, and 1.2 million children. To put those numbers in context, you might say that about 90 jumbo jets full of people are diagnosed with tuberculosis every day on average. When you're doing this, be sure to choose a comparator that's familiar to your audience. And finally, let's talk about natural frequencies such as 1 out of 3 and percentages. Research has shown that natural frequencies may help people because they give context and imagery, where percentages are somewhat abstract numbers. When possible, use both, such as 30% of people will have cancer during their lifetime. That means 1 out of 3 people will have this health condition. And finally, keep charts and tables simple. This example looks pretty simple, but it forces readers to estimate the numbers using the scale along the left side, the y-axis. In this after example, the numbers are included at the top of the bars, so readers don't need to use a scale.
Okay, that was our skills, our strategies for plain language and health literacy. This is the last part of our agenda today, resources that you can use to learn more and help apply health literacy and plain language to your work with your students. We just have some online resources where you can learn more about health literacy and plain language. But again, we will include these in the summary that we'll send you by email, so you don't need to worry about writing them down. But if you want to, you can also just do an online search for health literacy or plain language to learn more about it. Before we end, we have just a minute or so. What questions do you have for us? You can unmute and ask, or you can type in the chat. Okay, would you use serif fonts for longer passages? You can, if you would like to use a serif font, as long as it's clear, like Times New Roman or something. Just stay away from the sort of real fancy fonts or condensed fonts that are thinner. Serif fonts can work for long passages. Yeah, thanks for the question. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, sans serif I typically use for captions and subheads. Yeah, you can do a combination. Sometimes we'll use serif fonts for headings and then sans serif for body text. That's another way that you can make headings stand out from body text, so in captions. Okay, I think we're just about at time. Thank you so much for your time today. If you have questions, please reach out to us. The material that we email to you next week will have our contact information on it. And you're welcome to reach out to us if you have questions. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day and rest of the conference. And we'll just talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.